I adjusted the pearl necklace my mother had given me on my wedding day and took a steadying breath before stepping into the sunlit dining room of our lakeside home, where my husband of 15 years was about to shatter our marriage in front of my entire family. "Cassandra will be taking your place," Jackson would soon announce with a coldness I'd never witnessed in all our years together. But he didn't know my father, a retired military man whose single expression that night would set everything in motion. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The spacious dining room of our Pinewood Lake home hummed with the familiar sounds of family gathering. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, dancing across the oak table I had painstakingly set with my grandmother's china, the special collection we used only for milestone celebrations. Today marked our 15th wedding anniversary, and as tradition dictated, we were surrounded by those closest to us. The aroma of slow-roasted prime rib, Jackson's favorite, wafted from the kitchen where my sister Olivia was adding final touches to the sides. Her children's laughter echoed from the deck outside where they played under the watchful eye of my brother-in-law. This lakeside home had been our sanctuary, the place where Jackson and I had built our life after his software company took off 7 years ago. "Lauren, did you chill the champagne?" my mother called from the kitchen. "The special bottle from your trip to France?" "All taken care of," I replied, straightening the last fork into perfect alignment. My mother had always been particular about celebrations, a trait I'd inherited along with her attention to detail. Jackson was upstairs changing after his morning golf game, unusually late returning from the country club. Lately, he'd been spending more weekends there, citing networking opportunities and business discussions. I'd chosen to believe him despite the late-night texts and the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume that occasionally clung to his shirts when he returned home. Our daughter Madison rushed through the dining room, nearly colliding with the carefully arranged centerpiece of white hydrangeas and blue delphiniums. "Dad's here," she announced, her 13-year-old enthusiasm momentarily making me forget my growing concerns. "And someone's with him," she added, her voice dropping with uncertainty. Followed more slowly, pausing to check my reflection in the antique mirror that hung in our entryway. At 41, I still maintained the athletic figure that had first caught Jackson's eye at university, though fine lines had begun to frame my eyes, evidence of both laughter and recent worry. I'd taken extra care with my appearance today, intuition, warning me that something was amiss. Jackson entered with an unfamiliar confidence, his arm casually draped around a striking woman who couldn't have been more than 30. She wore a dress that spoke of careful selection and a smile that suggested she belonged exactly where she was, in my home, beside my husband. "Lauren," Jackson nodded coolly, as if greeting an acquaintance rather than his wife of 15 years. "Family, I'd like you to introduce Cassandra Reed. She's been helping me with some special projects at the company." The room fell silent. My mother's serving spoon clattered against the side dish she'd been placing on the table. My father, who had been quietly admiring the lake view, turned slowly, his military posture becoming even more rigid as his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Cassandra, this is my wife Lauren," Jackson continued, the introduction clearly an afterthought. "Lovely home," Cassandra purred, her gaze sweeping critically over the decor I'd spent years perfecting. "Jackson has told me so much about your charming family traditions." I extended my hand automatically, years of social etiquette overriding the alarm bells clanging in my head. "Welcome to our home," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Madison tugged at Jackson's sleeve. "Dad, I finished my science project. The one you promised to help with? Want to see it now?" Jackson glanced down distractedly. "Later, sweetheart. Cassandra and I need to freshen up before dinner." They ascended the stairs toward our bedroom, and I realized with a jolt that this was no impulsive action. The way Cassandra navigated our home suggested familiarity, as if she'd been here before, perhaps during the business trips when Madison and I had visited my parents. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wooden spoon still in hand. "Lauren," she whispered, her face pale. "What on earth is going on?" "I wish I knew," I replied, the knot in my stomach tightening. My father appeared at my elbow, his weathered hand gentle on my shoulder. "You okay, sunshine?" he asked quietly, using the childhood nickname that had always made me feel protected. "I'm fine, Dad," I lied. "Just surprised Jackson brought a colleague without mentioning it." My father's steel gray eyes, so similar to my own, studied me carefully. He'd always seen through my pretenses since I was a little girl trying to hide a poor grade or a broken heart. "That's not a colleague," he stated flatly. "And you're not fine." Before I could respond, my sister Olivia arrived with the roast, her easy smile faltering as I quietly explained the situation. My brother-in-law returned with the children, his jovial expression hardening as he assessed the tension in the room. The time we gathered around the dining table, I'd adopted a mask of composure that threatened to crack with each passing minute. Jackson seated Cassandra directly across from me, where my mother usually sat. Mom noticed but said nothing as she took a different chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. The conversation staggered awkwardly through appetizers, with Cassandra dominating every exchange, referencing private jokes with Jackson and speaking of their work projects in a way that excluded everyone else. She casually touched his arm, his shoulder, fingertips lingering just long enough to claim ownership. "Jackson tells me you used to work in architectural design before becoming a homemaker," Cassandra said during a lull, her tone making homemaker sound like an unfortunate medical condition. "Lauren was the lead designer at Westbrook and Associates," my father corrected before I could respond. "She gave up a partnership track position to raise Madison when Jackson's company was still operating out of your garage." Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "Ancient history now," he said dismissively. "Lauren's perfectly happy with her charity committees and tennis lessons." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. The Jackson I'd married had supported my career, had been proud of my accomplishments. He'd never reduced my choices to frivolities. When my mother asked about our summer plans for the lake house, Jackson cleared his throat. "Actually, I have an announcement about that." The room grew still. Even Madison sensed the shift, putting down her fork and looking uncertainly between us. "I've been offered an opportunity to expand the company to Singapore," Jackson stated. "It's the chance of a lifetime, one I've been working toward for years." "That's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely pleased despite everything. We'd discussed the possibility of international expansion for months. "Cassandra and I leave next month," he continued, not meeting my eyes. "We'll be overseeing the new Asian market division together." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Cassandra, and you?" I repeated, certain I'd misheard. Jackson finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of defiance and something like pity. He reached for Cassandra's hand atop the table. "Lauren, let's be adults about this. Things between us haven't been working for a long time." "Since when?" I whispered, aware of Madison watching wide-eyed from her seat. "Cassandra understands the demands of my work, the lifestyle I need to maintain at this level," Jackson continued as if I hadn't spoken. "She's been an invaluable partner these past 8 months." 8 months. While I had been planning our anniversary celebration, redecorating our lake house, and helping Madison through her first year of middle school, my husband had been constructing an exit strategy from our marriage. "I think Madison should be excused," my mother intervened, her voice strained. "No," Jackson interrupted firmly. "Everyone's here. We can get everything out in the open." He turned to me, his expression hardening in a way I'd never seen before. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. The house in the city will need to be sold, of course. You'll get a fair settlement." "The house?" I echoed, my voice sounding distant, to my own ears. Madison's home? Her school district? Her friends? Jackson waved dismissively. She'll adjust. Kids are resilient. And where exactly do you expect us to go? The question escaped before I could stop it. Jackson glanced at Cassandra, who smiled thinly. That's not really my concern, is it? He replied. Not your concern, I repeated, the words hollow in my chest. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. Look, Lauren. Jackson's voice took on the condescending tone he used with difficult clients. Let's be practical. Cassandra will be taking your position in Singapore, in the company social circle, in my life. It's just business, nothing personal. Nothing personal, I repeated. You've had a good run, he added, with a coldness that transformed his once-beloved face into something unrecognizable. 15 years? A nice lifestyle. Most trophy wives don't last half as long. Trophy wife. The term hit like a physical blow. Is that all I'd ever been to him? A status symbol to be upgraded when a newer model became available? The silence that followed was shattered by the sound of my father's chair scraping against the hardwood floor as he slowly rose to his full height. Though in his 60s, Colonel James Harrison still commanded the respect he'd earned during 30 years of military service. His face, usually carefully neutral from years of diplomatic missions, had transformed into something I'd rarely witnessed. Cold, calculated fury. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Madison? He said calmly, not taking his eyes off Jackson. Why don't you go show your grandmother that science project? As my mother quickly ushered my daughter from the room, my father's weathered hands planted firmly on the table, his gaze locked on my husband. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jackson, he said, his voice deceptively quiet. I think it's time we had a conversation about consequences. Consequences? Jackson laughed, though the sound lacked conviction. With all due respect, James, this is between Lauren and me. With no respect whatsoever, my father replied, his voice glacial. You made it everyone's business when you brought your affair into this home, in front of your daughter. Cassandra shifted uncomfortably beside Jackson. Perhaps I should wait. Outside, she murmured, suddenly less confident. You're not going anywhere, Jackson snapped, then softened his tone. This won't take long. My brother-in-law Doug stood as well, positioning himself beside our father. You know, I always thought you were too good for him, Lore, he said, not taking his eyes off Jackson. My mother returned without Madison, her normally warm face hardened with disappointment. She's upstairs with Olivia, working on her project, she informed us. My granddaughter doesn't need to witness her father's disgrace. Jackson's face reddened. That's enough. I didn't come here for a lecture or your approval. The decision is made. He turned to me, his expression impatient. Lauren, we can discuss the details with our lawyers next week. I'll have mine contact you. Lawyers, I echoed, the reality of the situation finally penetrating my shock. You've already spoken to lawyers? Of course I have, Jackson replied coolly. I'm not an idiot. He checked his watch. We have reservations at Bellini's at 8. We should go. Bellini's, the Italian restaurant where he had proposed 15 years ago, getting down on one knee between courses while the string quartet played our song. The place we had celebrated every anniversary since. Bellini's. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. My mother began, her voice strained. Jackson, please reconsider what you're doing. This isn't like you. This is exactly like him, my father interjected quietly. This is who your son-in-law has become, Vivian. A man who discards 15 years of marriage over dinner like returning an unsatisfactory meal to the kitchen. Doug, who had remained relatively silent until now, finally spoke. "Man, you're making a terrible mistake." Jackson stood abruptly, pulling Cassandra up with him. "I don't have to listen to this. Lauren, I'll have my assistant send over details about the house sale." He turned to leave, but my father's next words stopped him cold. "Before you go, Jackson, there's something you should know about your position at Nexus Technologies." Jackson turned slowly. "What about it?" My father smiled, thinly. "Do you recall who introduced you to Senator Williams 8 years ago? Who recommended you for the government contracts that saved your company during the recession?" The color drained from Jackson's face. Senator Williams had been my father's roommate at West Point and remained one of his closest friends. It was a connection Jackson had conveniently forgotten over the years as he built his technology empire. "That's ancient history," Jackson replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" My father removed his phone from his pocket. "Robert and I had dinner just last week. He mentioned the Singapore expansion, expressed some reservations about your ethical standards." Cassandra tugged at Jackson's arm. "Jackson, we should go." "Wait." Jackson's voice had lost its arrogance. "What do you mean, reservations?" My father's expression remained impassive. "The senator values family loyalty, integrity. He was impressed that you'd maintained such a stable home life while securing those sensitive government contracts. It was one of the factors in your favor when the committee was considering the Asia-Pacific Initiative." For the first time that evening, I saw fear flicker across Jackson's face. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," my father replied calmly. "Simply stating facts. Robert is flying in tomorrow. We're playing golf at the club. I'm sure he'll be interested to hear about tonight's announcement." The room fell silent as Jackson's carefully constructed facade began to crack, revealing the calculation beneath. He glanced at Cassandra, then back at me, visibly recalculating. "Lauren," he began, his tone softening artificially. "Perhaps I've been hasty. We should discuss this privately." The emotional whiplash was dizzying. Minutes ago, he'd been coldly discussing my replacement. Now he was backpedaling. Not because he loved me or regretted hurting me, but because his ambition was threatened. "I think I've heard enough," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "You've made your position quite clear, Jackson." "Don't be dramatic," he snapped, his conciliatory tone evaporating. "This is exactly why things haven't been working. You always make everything so emotional." "Emotional?" The word hung between us. "You just told our entire family you're leaving me. For your mistress, selling our home and moving to Singapore. How exactly should I react?" "Like an adult." Jackson's face hardened. "This marriage has been over for years. We're just going through the motions. You know it as well as I do." The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. We had grown distant, but I'd attributed it to his work pressure, to the natural evolution of a long marriage. I'd been trying to support him while he'd been planning his exit. "When?" I asked quietly. "When did you decide our marriage was over? Before or after you started sleeping with Cassandra?" Cassandra flinched at the directness of my question. Jackson's jaw tightened. "That's irrelevant. Not to me." I stood, my legs surprisingly steady. "Was it after my father's heart attack last year? When I was spending nights at the hospital, and you were suddenly working late every evening?" My mother gasped softly. Jackson had seemed supportive initially during Dad's health crisis, but within weeks, he'd become distant, irritable, focused, exclusively on work. "Don't bring that up now," Jackson muttered, glancing uncomfortably at Cassandra, whose perfectly composed expression had faltered. "Why not?" "It's relevant to when you decided our marriage was disposable." I turned to Cassandra. "Did he tell you about that? Or about Madison's struggles with anxiety when she started middle school 3 months ago while he was at a conference and unreachable?" "Lauren, that's enough," Jackson warned. "No, it's not nearly enough," I replied, something breaking free. Inside me, the dam of accommodations and rationalizations I'd built over years of making excuses for his absences. You want to leave? Fine. But don't pretend this is mutual or that I somehow failed you by expecting basic decency from my husband. Jackson looked around the room, assessing the unified disapproval facing him. His shoulders straightened as he made a decision. We're leaving, he announced to Cassandra. This is exactly the drama I wanted to avoid. Drama you created, my father noted dryly. Jackson ignored him, turning to me one last time. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. I suggest you find your own representation quickly. The Singapore position starts in 6 weeks, and I'll need the house sold before then. The casual cruelty of it, the expectation that Madison and I would simply vacate our home on his timetable, left me breathless. And where exactly are we supposed to go? I asked again. Jackson shrugged. Your father seems eager to involve himself. Perhaps he can solve that problem too. As they turned to leave, my mother stepped forward. Jackson, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Please don't do this. Don't throw away your family. For a moment, something like doubt crossed Jackson's face. Then Cassandra squeezed his arm, and the moment passed. I'll call you tomorrow, Vivian, he said, not meeting her eyes. Then they were gone, the front door closing with a finality that echoed through the silent house. I stood frozen in the entryway, aware of my family's concerned gazes but unable to face them. The carefully constructed reality of my life had shattered in less than an hour. My marriage, my home, my future, all swept away by a husband who had apparently stopped loving me long ago without bothering to mention it. Lauren, my father's voice was gentle now. The formidable colonel replaced by the dad who had taught me to ride a bike and bandaged my scraped knees. Sit down, sunshine. I sank back into my chair, staring at the uneaten anniversary dinner growing cold on the table. He's been planning this for months, I said numbly. All those late nights and business trips. He was building a new life without... Doug placed a hand on my shoulder. He's an idiot, Lore. Always has been. But he's Madison's father, I whispered. How do I tell my daughter that her dad is choosing another woman over us, that we're losing our home? The sound of running footsteps on the stairs interrupted us. Madison burst into the dining room, her science project, a meticulously constructed model of sustainable architecture, clutched proudly in her hands. Where's Dad? She asked, looking around the table with innocent expectation. I want to show him my project. I fixed the solar panels like he suggested. The sight of my daughter, so eager for her father's approval, so unaware of how drastically her world had just changed, broke something inside me. Tears I'd been holding back spilled over as I opened my arms to her. Mom? Madison's voice wavered with confusion. Why are you crying? Where did Dad and that lady go? I pulled her close, unsure how to answer, when my father knelt beside us both. Your dad had to leave, sweetheart, he said gently. But how about you show me that project? I hear it has some impressive solar technology. As Madison hesitantly began explaining her project to my father, I caught my mother's eye across the table. Her expression mirrored my own heartbreak with an added layer of maternal fury on my behalf. I'm so sorry, Lauren, she whispered. It's not your fault, I replied automatically. But as I watched my daughter pointing out the features of her model to my father, a cold realization settled in my chest. Jackson hadn't just betrayed me tonight. He'd betrayed Madison, whose world was about to be upended. He'd betrayed my parents, who would now have to watch their daughter and granddaughter struggle. And for what? A younger woman? A prestigious position? The perfect life he'd decided we no longer fit into? In that moment, beneath the shock and hurt, something else stirred. A determination I hadn't felt in years. Jackson expected me to crumble, to make this easy for him, to quietly step aside so Cassandra could take my place. I met my father's eyes over Madison's head, and something passed between us. An unspoken understanding. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after Jackson's bombshell announcement dawned with painful clarity. I awoke in our king-sized bed, my eyes gritty from a night of intermittent tears, to the buzz of my phone. 3 missed calls from Jackson and a text. "We need to talk. Meeting with realtor at 2. Be there." No apology. No acknowledgement of how he'd shattered our family. Just business as usual. I pulled myself out of bed and padded to Madison's room. She was still sleeping, clutching the stuffed elephant Jackson. Had brought her from a business trip to Thailand years ago. How much should I tell her? At 13, she was perceptive enough to know something was terribly wrong, but too young to understand the full complexity of adult betrayal. Downstairs, I was surprised to find my mother at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee already brewed. "Hope you don't mind," she said, pushing a steaming mug toward me. "I couldn't sleep, and I didn't want you to wake up alone." "You stayed all night?" I asked, sinking into a chair opposite her. "Your father and I took the guest rooms. Olivia and Doug went home with the kids, but they'll be back later." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Lauren, I am so ashamed of Jackson. What he's doing, it's unforgivable." The simple validation loosened something in my chest. "Have you spoken to him?" My mother's face tightened. "He's not answering your father's calls." I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth a stark contrast to the cold reality settling over me. "He wants to sell the house. He's bringing a realtor today." "He can't just," my mother began, then stopped herself. "Of course he can. His name is on the deed, isn't it?" I nodded. When we'd bought the house, I'd just left my position at Westbrook to care for Madison while Jackson's company was expanding. He had insisted on handling the finances, presenting it as a gift to me. Freedom from bureaucratic concerns while I focused on motherhood. What a fool I'd been, mistaking control for consideration. "What are you going to do?" my mother asked quietly. I stared into my coffee cup, wishing it held answers instead of just caffeine. "I don't know. Find a lawyer, I suppose." "Your father mentioned someone," she replied. "Andrea Patel. He seemed to think she was very good." Of course, my father would already have a plan. Colonel James Harrison had spent his career ensuring that operations succeeded even when the odds seemed impossible. I'd inherited his stubbornness, if not his strategic mind. "I'll call her today," I promised. Though the thought of retelling last night's humiliation to a stranger made my stomach clench. My mother stood and began making breakfast, the familiar routine strangely comforting in its normality. We were setting plates on the table when Madison wandered in, hair tousled from sleep. "Is Dad back yet?" she asked, scanning the kitchen hopefully. My mother and I exchanged glances. "No, sweetheart," I said carefully. "Dad's not here right now." "When is he coming? Home?" He didn't even look at my project. Madison's disappointment was palpable, and it kindled something fierce inside me. Jackson had the right to leave me if he wanted, but abandoning Madison with not even a backward glance, that was unforgivable. "Madison," I began, choosing my words, carefully. "Dad and I need to talk to you about some changes that might be happening." "What kind of changes?" Her eyes narrowed with the instinctive wariness of a child sensing adult evasion. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. My mother went to answer it, returning moments later with my father in tow. "Morning, kiddo," my father greeted Madison, ruffling her hair. "How about you and I take that architecture model of yours outside and see how the solar panels work in real sunlight?" It was a transparent attempt to remove Madison from an adult conversation, but she went willingly, always eager for my father's attention. Once they were outside, my mother turned to me. "Have you checked your accounts?" she asked, quietly. "Your father mentioned it last night." The question hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't even thought about money yet. still reeling from the emotional impact of Jackson's betrayal. Now I grabbed my laptop with shaking hands, logging into our joint accounts. The first was nearly empty, just $256 remaining from what should have been over $20,000 in our household expense account. The joint savings account was completely drained. The investment portfolio we'd built together showed recent massive withdrawals. "He's emptied everything," I whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. "How could he do this? When did he even have time?" My mother leaned over my shoulder, her face paling as she saw the transaction history. "Last week," she said, pointing to a transfer date. "He's been planning this methodically." The door from the backyard slid open, and my father returned, his expression grim. When he saw our faces, he nodded knowingly. "He's moved the money, hasn't he?" I nodded mutely. "Bastard," my father muttered, then immediately apologized to my mother. "No offense taken," she replied tightly. "At this point, it's an accurate description." "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling more lost than I ever had in my adult life. My father pulled out his phone. "First, we call Andrea, then we freeze whatever assets we can before he liquidates anything else." As he dialed, I sat stunned. The financial betrayal somehow more shocking than the emotional one. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision or midlife crisis. Jackson had systematically dismantled our shared life, carefully extracting himself financially before delivering the final blow. How long had he been planning this? How many nights had he lain beside me, thinking about his escape while I slept, trusting beside him? "Andrea can see you at noon," my father announced, ending his call. "Her office is downtown." "I can't," I said automatically. "Jackson is bringing a realtor at 2. I should be here." "Let him bring the realtor," my father replied firmly. "You need to secure your legal position before engaging with him again. Doug can stay here to make sure they don't try anything inappropriate." The idea of my brother-in-law confronting Jackson and his realtor made me wince, but I nodded. What choice did I have? In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from secure wife and mother to a woman fighting to keep a roof over her child's head. Phone buzzed again. "Jackson. Meeting changed to 3. Make sure the house is presentable." "Make sure the house is presentable," I read aloud, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. As if I'm the maid now. As if my only value was maintaining his home. My mother's hand on my shoulder steadied me. "One step at a time, Lauren. First the lawyer, then we'll deal with Jackson." My father returned from checking on Madison. "She's helping Doug fix the solar panels on her model," he reported, then studied my face carefully. "You need to tell her something, Lauren. Children sense when things are wrong." "What do I say?" I asked helplessly. "Your father has decided we're not good enough for his new life?" "You tell her that sometimes adults make decisions that are hard to understand," my father advised gently, "that her dad still loves her, but that there are going to be some changes in where everyone lives." "But does Jackson still love her?" I wondered aloud. He didn't even say goodbye last night. Didn't call this morning to check on her. My mother looked stricken. "Jackson can be thoughtless, but he loves Madison. I know he does." I wanted to believe her, for Madison's sake if not my own. But Jackson's cold calculation suggested otherwise. He'd been preparing his exit for months, moving money, pursuing a relationship with Cassandra, securing the Singapore position. At no point had he considered how this would affect his daughter. As I showered and dressed for the lawyer's appointment, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock was giving way to a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Jackson had made his choice. Now I needed to make mine. Not just for myself, but for... Madison Andrea Patel's office was in a sleek downtown building, her reception area tastefully understated. The woman herself was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes that missed nothing. "Colonel Harrison," she greeted my father warmly, then turned to me. Mrs. Hayes, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. It's Ms. Anderson, actually, I corrected her automatically. I kept my maiden name professionally. The distinction felt important suddenly, a reminder that I existed before Jackson and would continue to exist after him. Of course, she nodded, leading us into a conference room. Your father has given me a brief overview, but I'd like to hear everything from you. Leave nothing out, no matter how embarrassing or painful. I need the complete picture to help you. Effectively. So I told her everything. The dinner, the betrayal, the drained bank accounts, the demand to sell the house. As I spoke, she took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. And you haven't worked since Madison was born? She asked. I've done freelance architectural consulting, I replied. Small projects, mostly for local firms. Nothing like the corporate position I left, but I've kept my license current. You've maintained your professional contacts? I nodded, though with less confidence. Some of them. I've attended industry events when I could. Good, Andrea said, making another note. Now about the house. Whose idea was it for you to stay home with Madison? Jackson's, I admitted. He said one of us should be fully present for Madison, and since he earned more, I trailed off. And the financial arrangements? Joint accounts? Separate accounts? Mostly joint, but I hesitated, then continued. I do have a personal account. It's small, just what I earned from my consulting work. Jackson doesn't know about it. Andrea looked up sharply. How much? About $45,000, I said. I've been saving it for Madison's college fund. For the first time, Andrea smiled. Well, that's something he didn't get his hands on. Don't touch that. Money yet. It may be important leverage. She closed her notepad. Ms. Anderson, based on what you've told me, we have grounds to file for an emergency injunction preventing the sale of your home and to freeze any remaining marital assets. Jackson's actions, emptying joint accounts without notice, constitute financial misconduct that will work against him in court. So I can stop him from selling the house? I asked, hope flaring. Potentially, she tempered. At minimum, we can delay any sale until proper division of assets is determined. The fact that you left your career at his suggestion to care for your daughter strengthens our position. She glanced at her watch. It's 1:30 now. You said he's bringing a realtor at 3? I nodded. Perfect, she said, reaching for her phone. That gives me just enough time to have an emergency injunction, delivered before they arrive. As she made the call, my father squeezed my hand. You're doing well, sunshine. I don't feel well, I admitted. I feel like I'm drowning. But you're swimming, he replied. That's what matters. Andrea hung up the phone. My clerk is preparing the papers now. A courier will deliver them to your home by 2:45. When Jackson arrives, you can inform him that no sale can proceed until our court date. She handed me her card. Call me immediately after he leaves. I want to know his reaction. As my father and I left her office, a peculiar lightness had replaced my earlier numbness. For the first time since Jackson's announcement, I felt a flicker of control returning, not over him or his choices, but over my own fate. Ready to face him? My father asked as we drove back to the house. I thought about it for a moment. No, I admitted. But I'm going to anyway. Doug was waiting on the front porch when we returned, his expression grim. Jackson called twice. He reported. Wanted to know if the house was presentable for viewing. I told him it was his house too, so he should know. What did he say to that? I asked, unlocking the front door. Nothing printable, Doug replied with a humorless smile. Inside, my mother had transformed the lingering chaos from last night's disastrous dinner into perfect order. The dining room table gleamed, fresh flowers had replaced the wilted arrangement, and the faint scent of lemon polish hung in the air. I hope you don't mind, she said, wringing her hands on a dish towel. I needed to keep busy. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by her efforts. Not for Jackson's benefit, but for mine. Where's Madison? Olivia took her to the mall. Dougie explained. We thought it might be better if she wasn't here when Jackson arrives. As if summoned by his name, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched Jackson emerge, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. Beside him was not Cassandra, but a polished woman in her 40s carrying a leather portfolio, the realtor, I presumed. The doorbell rang precisely at 2:57 p.m. Ready? My father asked quietly. I smoothed my dress, the same one I'd worn last night, a silent reminder of how quickly life could change, and nodded. Doug opened the door. Jackson's confident smile faltered when he saw my brother-in-law, then my father behind him. His eyes finally found me standing in the foyer with my mother at my side. I didn't realize we were having a family reunion, he said coldly. This is Monica Bennett from Prestige Properties. Monica, my wife. Lauren. Soon-to-be ex-wife, I corrected, extending my hand to the realtor. Ms. Bennett. Monica glanced between us, professional smile fixed, but eyes registering the tension. Pleasure to meet you. Mr. Hayes has explained you're relocating to Singapore. Such an exciting opportunity. Before I could respond, a courier's van pulled up to the curb. The young delivery man jogged up our front walk, a large envelope in hand. Delivery for Jackson Hayes, he called. Jackson frowned. That's me. The courier handed him the envelope, had him sign, and departed with a cheerful, "Have a nice day," that seemed surreal in the tense atmosphere. What's this? Jackson muttered, tearing open the envelope. As he scanned the contents, his face darkened with fury. An injunction, are you serious, Lauren? What is it? Monica asked, clearly uncomfortable. My wife, Jackson began. Lauren, my father interrupted firmly, has filed an emergency injunction preventing the sale of this house, Jackson finished, his voice tight with controlled rage. This is completely unnecessary. I was going to be fair about the proceeds. Like you were fair about our bank accounts? I asked quietly. Jackson flinched almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry, but if there's a legal dispute over the property, Monica interjected, I can't proceed with a listing at this time. She closed her portfolio with a decisive snap. Mr. Hayes, please contact me when this situation is resolved. With an apologetic nod to me, she retreated to her car, leaving Jackson standing in the doorway, injunction in hand, barely contained fury on his face. May I come in? He asked through gritted teeth. I stepped aside, allowing him entry into what had been his home less than 24 hours ago. The atmosphere shifted as the door closed behind him, the pretense of civility evaporating. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded, waving the legal document. Do you have any idea how this looks to the board? To our investors? I don't particularly care how it looks, I replied, surprised by my own calm. I'm more concerned with having a place for Madison and me to live. I told you there would be a fair settlement, Jackson insisted. Like you did? I countered. You've had legal counsel for weeks, Jackson. You've been moving money, planning your exit. When exactly were you going to tell me about any of this if Cassandra hadn't been part of the equation? Jackson's eyes narrowed. This isn't about Cassandra. No, my father interjected. It's about your character, which has been found severely wanting. Jackson ignored him, focusing on me. Lauren, be reasonable. Singapore is a tremendous opportunity. The house needs to be sold quickly. And where are Madison and I supposed to go? I asked for what felt like the 100th time. You could move in with your parents, Jackson suggested dismissively, or find an apartment. The real estate market is strong. You'll get a good settlement when the house sells. My mother, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Jackson, do you hear yourself? You're talking about uprooting your daughter from her home as if it's a minor inconvenience? Madison is adaptable, Jackson insisted. Kids adjust. Like, you've adjusted to your new life, I asked. So quickly that you brought your mistress to our anniversary dinner? A flicker of shame crossed Jackson's face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. That was poorly handled, he admitted. Cassandra thought it would be better to get everything out in the open at once. Cassandra thought, my mother repeated incredulously. So now you're letting your girlfriend make decisions about how to end your marriage? Jackson straightened, his jaw set. This isn't productive. The injunction is a temporary setback. My lawyer will have it overturned. On what grounds? I asked. That you want the money quickly? That your convenience outweighs your daughter's stability? On the grounds that I own this house, Jackson snapped. Actually, my father interjected, in the state of Illinois, the marital home is considered joint property regardless of whose name is on the deed, particularly when there's a minor child involved. Jackson shot him a venomous look. Stay out of this, James. I'm afraid I can't do that, my father replied calmly. Not when you're attempting to deprive my daughter and granddaughter of their home. Jackson turned back to me, changing tactics. Lauren, please, let's discuss this rationally, just the two of us. Send your parents and Doug home and we can work this out. The conciliatory tone might have worked yesterday. Today I saw it for what it was. Manipulation from a man who had already proven he couldn't be trusted. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my family, I replied. Jackson's expression hardened. Fine. Have it your way. But understand this. Fighting me is only going to drain whatever settlement you might have received. I have the resources for a long legal battle. Do you? The naked threat hung in the air between us. Jackson was right. About one thing. He did have resources, especially with the Singapore position secured. What did I have? A personal account with $45,000 and a freelance career I'd put on the back burner for years. Doug stepped forward, his hands clenched at his sides. Are you seriously threatening my sister? I'm stating facts, Jackson replied coldly. Lauren needs to be practical. Practical, I echoed. The word crystallized something inside me, a decision point. I could capitulate, make this easy for Jackson and by extension perhaps easier for Madison and myself in the short term. Or I could stand firm, fighting not just for our home, but for the principle that my daughter and I deserved better than to be discarded for Jackson's convenience. My mother was watching me with concern. Lauren, perhaps— No, I interrupted, my voice steady. Jackson wants practicality? Fine. It's practical for Madison to remain in her home, in her school district, near her friends and support system. It's practical for me to have time to rebuild my career before being forced to relocate. It's practical for an accurate accounting of marital assets to be completed before any major financial decisions are made. I stepped closer to Jackson, holding his gaze. Singapore doesn't start for 6 weeks. That's your timeline, not mine. Madison and I will be staying put until a court determines what's fair. This is a mistake, Jackson warned. You're making an enemy of me, Lauren. The words stung despite everything. 12 years of marriage reduced to threats in our foyer. I'm not making you anything, Jackson, I replied quietly. You chose what to become all on your own. A tense silence fell, broken by the sound of a car door slamming. Through the window, I saw Olivia's car pulling into the driveway, Madison visible in the passenger seat. Jackson followed my gaze, his expression faltering. Is that Madison? I should talk to her. Now you want to talk to her? Doug asked incredulously. After bringing your girlfriend to dinner and skipping town without a word? Jackson had the grace to look uncomfortable. She's still my daughter. Yes, she is, I agreed. And she's confused and hurt. If you're going to speak to her, you need to think very carefully about what you say. For the first time since entering the house, Jackson seemed uncertain. What have you told her? The truth, that there are going to be some changes, but both her parents still love her. I didn't add that I'd begun to doubt the latter part of that statement. Madison bounded up the front walk, then froze when she saw Jackson through the open door. For a heartbreaking moment, uncertainty flickered across her young face before she ran forward. "Dad, you're back! Did you see my project? Uncle Doug helped me fix the solar panels." Jackson crouched awkwardly, accepting Madison's enthusiastic hug with visible discomfort. "Hey, kiddo. No, I haven't seen it yet. I can't stay long. I have a meeting." Madison's face fell. "But you just got here." "I know, but—" Jackson glanced at me helplessly. "Dad has some work things to take care of," I explained, stepping in to soften the blow. "But maybe he could come by another time specifically to see your project?" Jackson nodded quickly. "Yes, definitely. I'll call and arrange a time." Madison studied her father with the penetrating perception unique to children. "Are you moving away? Mom said there might be changes." Jackson shot me an accusatory glance. "Well, yes, I have a new job in Singapore. It's very important." "Can I come visit you there?" Madison asked. A flash of panic crossed Jackson's face. "Of course, eventually. It's just very far away, and I'll be extremely busy at first." "Is that lady going with you? The one from dinner?" The simple question landed like a grenade in the room. My mother made a small, distressed sound. Doug coughed, to cover what might have been a laugh. My father remained impassive, but his eyes never left Jackson's face. "Cassandra," Jackson corrected automatically. "Yes, she works with me. She'll be in Singapore too." Madison frowned. "But not Mom or me?" Jackson's expression was pained. "Madison, sometimes grown-ups, sometimes people change, and relationships change. And you don't want to live with us anymore?" Madison asked directly, her voice small but steady. The blunt question seemed to pierce Jackson's practiced exterior. For a moment, I glimpsed genuine conflict in his eyes, not over leaving me, but over how his choices would affect his daughter. "It's complicated, kiddo," Jackson began, but Madison cut him off. "Is it because of something I did?" "No!" Jackson exclaimed, genuine horror in his voice. "God, no, Madison. This has nothing to do with you. You're perfect. Then why are you leaving?" Madison persisted, the tremor in her voice betraying her composure. Jackson looked helplessly toward me, silently pleading for rescue from the corner he'd backed himself into. But this was his mess to clean up, his choices to explain. "I still love you, Madison," Jackson said finally. "That will never change. But sometimes adults need different things to be happy. I need to take this job in Singapore and—" "With Cassandra," Madison replied. Jackson winced. "Yes, with Cassandra. Instead of us," Madison concluded, her young face solemn with understanding beyond her years. In that moment, watching my daughter process her father's betrayal with more dignity than Jackson had shown in ending our marriage, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't just about a house or bank accounts or even the humiliation of being replaced. This was about showing Madison that self-respect mattered, that people who claim to love you should treat you with dignity, that there were consequences for breaking promises and hearts. "I should go," Jackson said awkwardly, rising to his feet. "I'll call about the project, okay?" Madison nodded, but the excited light had gone from her eyes. Olivia, who had been hovering uncertainly in the doorway, stepped forward. "Hey, Madison, why don't you show me where you want to display your model? We could set up a special shelf in your room." As they headed upstairs, Jackson turned to me. "This injunction is a temporary setback," he said quietly. "I'm still going to Singapore, and this house is still going to be sold. You're only delaying the inevitable." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "Or maybe I'm finally standing up for what Madison and I deserve." "And what's that?" Jackson asked with a trace of his earlier condescension. I met his gaze steadily. Better than what you're offering. As Jackson left, injunction crumpled in his fist. I felt a strange sense of clarity. The man I'd married, the life I'd built, the future I'd planned, all gone in the space of 24 hours. Yet in their place was something new, a determination. That surprised even me. You okay? My father asked quietly, coming to stand beside me as we watched Jackson's car pull away. No, I admitted, but I think I will be. 6 months after Jackson's betrayal, I stood on the deck of our lakeside home, no longer our home, but mine, as stipulated in the final divorce settlement. Autumn had painted the surrounding trees in brilliant shades of red and gold, their reflections dancing across the water's surface as the evening light softened. "Mom, did you see my drawing got selected for the school art exhibition?" Madison called, emerging from the house with a letter in hand. "That's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely proud. In the months since Jackson's departure, Madison had discovered a passion for architectural illustration, combining my professional background with her own artistic talents. So much had changed since that devastating anniversary dinner. The emergency injunction had been only the beginning of a legal battle that revealed the true extent of Jackson's deception. Andrea had been relentless, uncovering offshore accounts and hidden assets that Jackson had been accumulating for over a year in preparation for his exit, but it was Senator Williams's intervention that truly altered the course of events. True to my father's word, he had been deeply troubled by Jackson's personal and financial conduct. A quiet word in the right ears had triggered an audit of Nexus Technologies' government contracts, revealing irregularities that Jackson had hidden from his board. Singapore evaporated overnight. The board, facing potential government sanctions, had withdrawn the position and placed Jackson on administrative leave pending investigation. Cassandra, sensing the shift in Jackson's fortunes, had ended their relationship within weeks, accepting a position with a competitor in Boston. Left with crumbling professional prospects and mounting legal troubles, Jackson had finally agreed to a settlement that protected Madison's and my interests. The house would remain ours, with generous support, payments, and a significant portion of the once-hidden assets transferred to trust accounts for Madison's education. In an ironic twist, the very financial misconduct Jackson had hoped would fund his new life had become the leverage that secured our future. "When's Grandpa getting here?" Madison asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Any minute now," I replied, checking my watch. "He's bringing the plans for the boathouse renovation." My father, in his retirement, had discovered a talent for small construction projects. The boathouse renovation was our joint venture, my architectural designs, his practical building skills, and Madison's creative input. And Mr. Donovan? I smiled at the mention of Michael Donovan, the head of a local architectural firm who had initially hired me for freelance work and recently offered me a partnership position. "He's coming for dinner tomorrow," I reminded her. Over the past months, Michael had become both a professional mentor and, more recently, a friend whose quiet support contrasted sharply with Jackson's calculated ambition. "You like him," Madison observed with the directness of a 13-year-old. "I do," I acknowledged, neither confirming nor denying the implication in her tone. "He's a good architect and a kind person." Madison nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer for now. "Dad called yesterday," she mentioned casually. "He wants to know if I can visit during spring break." Jackson had eventually found a position with a smaller firm in Dallas, a significant step down from his previous aspirations but stable enough to begin rebuilding his life. His relationship with Madison remained tentative, monthly video calls and occasional visits that were still strained but gradually improving. "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. She considered the question thoughtfully. "I think I want to go. Not because everything's okay, but because he's still your dad," I finished gently. "Yeah." She looked out at the lake. "Is that okay with you?" I put my arm around her shoulders. "Of course it is." We can look at flights. Next week. The sound of tires on gravel announced my father's arrival. As Madison ran to greet him, I remained on the deck, taking in the peaceful scene before me. 6 months ago, I had stood in our dining room, hearing my husband announce that another woman would be taking my place. The words had shattered my world, leaving me feeling replaced, discarded, worthless. Now I understood the fundamental flaw in Jackson's thinking, and in my own. There had never been a place that belonged to me in Jackson's life, a predetermined role I was meant to fill. There was only the life I chose to create, the boundaries I chose to defend, the values I chose to uphold. When Jackson brought Cassandra to our anniversary dinner, declaring she would replace me, he hadn't understood that I was never replaceable to begin with. What had appeared to be an ending, the collapse of my marriage, my security, my identity as Jackson's wife, had actually been the beginning of something far more valuable. The rediscovery of my own strength and the creation of a life defined, not by who chose me, but by what I chose for myself. My father appeared on the deck, blueprints tucked under his arm, and Madison. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going. To love what's next, tap to keep the journey going.